So, good afternoon and welcome. I think we're live. I'm not 100% certain, so apologies if we're not. So it could be you've been waiting a few moments and we've not said anything, or indeed I could be talking to nobody. So either way, welcome to one of our first, or one of my first summer engagement sessions around policing in the different parts of West Mercia. So my name is John Campion. I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. So my role is to act as the governance for West Mercia Police. I provide the funding, I provide the policy through my Safer West Mercia plan, and I also hold West Mercia Police and the Chief Constable to account for the service that they deliver to our community. Now, as part of all of that, I want to make sure that I hear the views of the public and engage with the public and to talk to them directly. And normally, in normal times, we would be doing that with my team across West Mercia at a range of summer events. We can't do that in these very odd and strange times. And so we, like lots of people, are having to adapt, and we are making sure that we are continuing to engage with our public via things like Facebook Live. So we have been advertising the session for a few days. We are broadcasting it as live, and then it will stay live it will stay as a copy on my Facebook page for those that want to watch afterwards. So I am joined today by two colleagues, and the third box is my office, who is hosting the broadcast. So if I could ask Jim to introduce himself.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Jim Baker. I am the local policing commander for the Telford and Wrekin area. I came back to Telford back in January earlier this year. I had previously worked at Telford back in 2013, 2014 as a chief inspector there. I've also worked across North Worcestershire, South Worcestershire and in force operations in recent years. So I was delighted to be given the opportunity to come back to Telford earlier this year, and it's a great place to work, great people, and lots of challenges. So that's me.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. Tracey?
Good evening. My name is Tracey Onslow, and I am the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia. I have been for coming up to 4 years. I deal very much with the commissioning side, the services that we fund all across West Mercia, and I also deal with a lot of the community engagement such as this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. And so today we're going to spend between half an hour, 45 minutes talking about some of the issues in Telford and Wrekin, and some of the maybe the last 3 months to some extent, and then more importantly as we go through the rest of the summer, and there are some important social distancing changes coming in the immediate future. We will be running a session like this for all of the policing areas. There is one in Shropshire later this week, and there is one for North Worcestershire, South Worcestershire and for Herefordshire next week. But if anybody wanted to submit a question, you are able to during the broadcast, and indeed if we can pick them up, we will do. Or indeed, if there is a question, if you make that you aren't able to put during the live broadcast, if you email them either through our social media channels or directly, we will pick those up for you. So I wanted to start really just to discuss a little bit around what's changed. It's probably easier to say what's not changed over the last 3 months. Jim, you as a policing commander have seen some very different expectations of the police placed on them in recent times to perhaps the normal expectations of the police. Could you just outline roughly what has changed in terms of the role of the police in recent months, and what do you think the impact of that's been?
I think it's been a very challenging year right from the outset. I think in many ways we started with the significant rainfall and floods back in February and March, and that presented a challenge for policing in a different way in terms of natural issues that came to the fore at that point. And as the local policing commander, we work with partners in respect of meeting the needs of the community in terms of flooding. And that quite seamlessly then ran into the situation we find ourselves in still in terms of the COVID-19 outbreak. And what we witnessed, we saw this gradual development of the situation. Communities became increasingly concerned about their health and well-being. We saw the impacts spread across the country. And policing did not remain untouched by that. And as and when we went into lockdown, the traditional normal type of policing that we would have been conducting, and those demands shrank significantly. So since lockdown, since COVID-19, our core business shrunk significantly. And we saw ourselves into more of a community engagement, supporting the whole COVID-19 piece as designed by government. And then over time, we've seen a gradual relaxation of the restrictions. And in that time period, certainly more latterly, certainly since the last May bank holiday. So the May bank holiday at the end of May, I actually looked at the data to see how busy we were compared to the same weekend last year. And actually across Shropshire and Telford, we were as busy. And in fact, we actually had 20% more prisoners this year as compared to last year, which again was significant. And I know, speaking with the chief would say, if we're that busy already, without the nighttime economy now coming as well, which obviously we'll be anticipating in future weeks, it gives an indication of that busyness. And I think what you've also seen, and I think it's been widely reported, is when I first joined the police a long time ago, when you, Mr. Commissioner, were a district councillor, and so was the Deputy Commissioner. When I first joined policing was very much around policing public space. So my job as a PC back in the day was very much about on the streets, assaults, vehicle crime. And what we've seen over the last, particularly over the last 10 years, is a transfer of policing inside private space, crime that takes place within private homes. So the domestic abuse issues that we face in society today. And I think we've seen significant amounts of that as part of that demand that I spoke about at the end of May.
Do you think that period, this last 3 months, has changed or altered the relationship with the public to a negative or positive, or do you think it remains unchanged?
I don't think it's untouched. I think there's elements where we can, I love getting the letters from school kids saying, thank you so much for what you're doing. My South Telford team organised a fantastic exercise with the young children of South Telford, and they took the individual posters and created a fantastic rainbow, which we then put on Madeley Police Station and outside Mallinsgate Police Station. I think the whole key worker piece, I know it's been very focused, and rightly so, on our national health colleagues and working very diligently and bravely within hospital settings. But I think it has reset the narrative to some degree, that the community more broadly sees the police as Robert Peel wanted. We are the public and the public are the police. And I think I think we've made some important strides there. That whole engagement piece rather than enforcement. So I'm hopeful that there's still pockets where we have to do more, of course there is, and there's still pockets in society where we're not held in such high regard. But I think there's been some significant strides, and we need to build upon that.
Jim,
sorry, Tracy.
I was just going to say very quickly, because as a member of the public, they might think, well, what have the police been doing, to be honest? Because the burglars are trapped at home, the motorists aren't on the road, there can't be any shoplifting because the shops are shut, pickpocketers, there's nobody about. So what would you say to people who thought perhaps it had been a really quiet time for you guys?
Well, and my opening remarks, in many ways it has. I think across Telford and Wrekin, we saw at various points in time, when we measure this year's crime versus last year's crime, some crime types, as you described, sort of shoplifting, are dramatically down, 60, 70% down. Overall crime at one point was over a third down. So what we did in terms of our CID colleagues put their uniforms back on and were out on patrol, giving that reassurance, engaging with the community, giving guidance around social distancing. And and being very careful around the regulations and what was law in terms of doing that. And we still had this piece where we had, violence within people's homes. We had a number of, really tragic issues where young children have been injured within the home setting. Horrible cases to deal with, and they did occur. So we still had that. Our work has transferred to that private space. Private space crimes did still occur, and so a lot of our work was in that area. So visibility around COVID-19, reassurance, and a lot still of that harm within people's homes.
One of my reassurances as Commissioner is around the very early on, Anthony and I did a session where we talked about the tone of the policing operation, and I've been very impressed by that tone of engagement, educating, working with the community rather than the more traditional enforcement role, and that's been really good to see, and I think it has paid dividends. I've even seen Peeler out in Newport, I think, working with the SNT. For those that don't know who Peeler is, it's the force mascot. I would imagine it was very hot inside Peeler. Whoever was volunteered to assist with that, but
it was very warm. I can tell you, it was very warm.
I can't imagine, Jim, they drag you into helping with that. But of course, we shouldn't bust the myth that Peeler isn't a real dog, because of course he is a real dog. But for me, one of the things is it doesn't say anywhere, does it, that working with your communities around reassurance and building that sense of community is part of the policing role. Well, actually, it is a central part of it, isn't it? It is a central part of ensuring that consent is maintained to do the more difficult things, including that mission that you've touched on of moving towards people's private spaces. Perhaps the traditional sense of a domestic being, well, it's behind closed doors, it's not our problem, whereas actually harm being caused to somebody who might be vulnerable is, I think, everybody's priority, and the police's role in that has been important. One of the things that we did early on is set up a PCC fund to be able to fund some of that community activity. I know, Tracey, you've been at the forefront of ensuring that it's out there, working with local groups. I know Jim touched on the role of things like councils and health groups, and really I've been impressed by the way that they've come together, and this fund been used to support their activity. Tracey, what kind of things have they used it for?
Oh, the ingenuity of the community groups out there never ceases to amaze me. They have been getting prescriptions, they have been fetching shopping, they have been delivering newspapers, food, anything people have needed, even just phone calls for a chat for people who are lonely. And the whole purpose behind the fund was that where people have given up their time, we were trying for them not to be too out of pocket as well, because, especially at these times when people have been furloughed, they're not getting as much wages as they were getting. It can be, especially when I think originally people thought it might be for a month and then it turns into 3. It can be quite stressful on the pocket. So when we put a fund out there, you kindly agreed to that. And we bought lots of PPE, we bought lots of hand sanitizer, we've done lots of photocopying, identity badges to ensure that people who are volunteering are safe within their communities, so the communities know who they are. We've been doing all sorts, really, newspapers, stationery, anything. And the public have really, really come out to help their close neighbours. And I do hope going forward that continues, because everybody knows who their neighbours are now. So it'd be lovely to continue with that.
And for me, some of the work around keeping our community safe and reducing them being vulnerable can be some of the softer sides, and supporting the community to help work together, I think, has been a really important part of that.
Yeah,
Jim,
if I just come in there, I mean, there's 2 examples I would use locally within Telford. Following our conversation today on Zoom, I have one later on tonight on Teams, so I'm going to give him both apps.
There are other video conferencing, of course.
Yes, there are available. Of course there are. I'll point it out. But the Telford and Wrekin interfaith group has really stepped up to the mark during the COVID situation. And faith is such an important vehicle for supporting the community and working with public bodies such as ourselves, and they've been delivering parcels as you describe. They've got all sorts of projects in mind, a peace pledge, school uniform provision, so that the whole, really is fantastic work that's been delivered there by the Telford and Wrekin Interfaith Group. And one further, just small example, police and community support officers, I know both the Deputy and the Commissioner really support that role. A fantastic story only the other day where two PCSOs were in a local shop, came across a vulnerable elderly person, clearly struggling to purchase food, not very in a good place financially, grabbed that situation, made the necessary referrals, food parcels now being delivered, support being given, so the eyes and ears of the police in the community supporting those vulnerable people. So just two little examples there, which I think epitomise what we've just been talking about.
One of the things about West Mercia and Telford is absolutely the same, is that sense of community spirit, and lots of things going on without fanfare or trumpet. It just happens, and the ability for us to be able to support that and play the role is great to see. And one of the reasons why I'm old enough to have been around from when PCSOs were introduced on the old police authority when they did, that additional resource to help be part of community, I think is a vital one.
I think also, John, sorry, before we just move off from that point, just to say that later on we are going to send some information out to people once we come out of lockdown, to say that if you have been helping somebody who is vulnerable, and while you've been helping them for whatever reason, because they've been shielding, if you've noticed other things around their vulnerability, and we're going to give some pointers as to what those might be. So, perhaps if, I mean, my garden's a terrible state, so I wouldn't want to use this as an example, but if perhaps there were things that were in a bad state of repair that needed help, and perhaps things were beyond what would be the norm, we're going to put some advice numbers out there for people to refer on to.
So, obviously, crime has changed during lockdown, and indeed volume's gone down and back up again, and we're seeing perhaps some of the more traditional crimes come through. We touched on antisocial behaviour and the role that the COVID legislation has maybe had during that. You saw a big spike at the end of May at the bank holiday. We're about to see another easing of the restrictions on us as a society. Lots of people desperate to get a haircut. I cut my own at some point, which I'm not sure was the right thing to do. So I'm going to have to let a professional loose on it imminently. But lots of other things people want to do, from go to a gym, through go to the cinema, go through other things, but also pubs. And we've seen, I think, a real change in how our violence associated with the nighttime economy has reduced, obviously, dramatically. What's your sort of message to the public, and what's your sort of plans around as the nighttime economy starts to get going again, which does seem to want to coincide with a bout of good weather?
Yeah, and I think it's been exercised in our minds for some time. We know our busiest night of the year is typically New Year's Eve, and that's busy for a whole host of reasons. And in many ways, we're using New Year's Eve as a reference point to how we may have to police the nighttime economy, certainly on July the 4th and then moving forward. Our message would be that everyone is going to be very keen to socialise and get back out there and see friends and family within a social setting. But we have got, the plea would be to the community to be sensible, to pace oneself. We will be back in terms of our business as usual working patterns. We will have more resources available to us on those nights. Telford's a little different to some of our other counties and towns around West Mercia, where our nighttime economy is probably more based around the smaller towns or villages, that the Wellingtons and the like. We don't have a massive central spot such as Shrewsbury would have in terms of nighttime economy. And again, that alcohol misuse will lead to, unfortunately, domestic abuse, domestic violence within home settings. And I think it's very important we don't lose sight of that as well in terms of our response as and when the bars and pubs become more available.
So obviously your team's been gearing up for it, as in we now know the date, as it were. The public can expect to see your teams more visible, but also some of the things that they don't see, that support around a more domestic environment, not only responding to when they happen, but also proactively supporting those that might be vulnerable. I've been very impressed during lockdown. I, as Commissioner, fund a raft of services that support domestic abuse victims and survivors. And they themselves have also been challenged in the way that they do their business. And you touched on it earlier, people are sometimes even more vulnerable in that domestic setting during lockdown. And there are still lots of services out there that I fund, and indeed they're perhaps delivered in a different way than they have been traditionally, because they've got to be. But my plea would also be, if you need help, Jim and his colleagues are available, and indeed will always respond to emergencies. But if you need other support, then don't be afraid to get in touch. Don't be afraid to either via our victim advice line, which is on the West Mercia website, or the other domestic abuse services that are in serving Telford and Wrekin.
Just on
Tracey?
that note, John, just before you move on, and not that it's very popular to give a bit of a government plug, but actually West Mercia did receive over £400,000 in additional grant to go towards domestic abuse and serious sexual violence services across West Mercia. So there has been additional funding to make up for any volume increases.
And I've been really impressed by the way they've adapted, because often some of these are quite small charities doing the work, and that third sector, it's amazing what they can do with a mobile and a laptop, whereas before they were in an office environment, and they're adapting to that has been really, really impressive. And one of my missions in my Safer West Mercia plan is to ensure that people are safe and feel safe. And domestic violence is a scourge on our society, and indeed it's one of those taboos that we've got to carry on breaking down, so it is never acceptable. The other thing I just wanted to touch on was around being safe outside. So this summer weather, it's beautiful today in North Worcestershire. It's just over 30 degrees, I think, when I looked a little earlier. Lots of temptation out there. Well, lots of people have got paddling pools in their gardens. Not everybody's got a paddling pool or indeed got a garden. So that temptation out there to open space and using water, or indeed perhaps with alcohol in the nighttime economy, of falling foul of our inland waterways. What's your message, Jim, around how people keeping safe, and indeed the risk that they should be taking, and what are your teams doing to help support the community to keep them safe?
I mean, it's quite a simple message, isn't it, in terms of stay out of the water. I mean, the cold water shock is well documented now. People think that they can partake in exercise or cool off in open water, as you describe. It's a very dangerous. There's hidden obstacles under the water that people can't see. There's weeds. There could be all sorts of machinery or vehicles hidden, and that whole piece, how the body reacts to a cold water shock, and how you can have those hyperventilation issues, and very quickly you can succumb. And also you're putting in jeopardy other people that might come to your rescue as well. So it may be very warm out there. It might seem like a good idea, but there's tragedies week in, week out, up and down the country, within West Mercia. And I know you've worked very closely with a number of families that have lost their loved ones in these circumstances. It's a simple plea. Please don't go in the water. It's not safe. Stay out of the water, please.
I think that was one of the most staggering things when I first started working the whole area of West Mercia. Because obviously our river's very, very well known, but I just didn't realise how many times that happens, that somebody falls in. A lot of the time it's on a night out, they've lost their footing for whatever reason, and it's an all too regular occurrence that I don't think sometimes people realise the scale of how often it happens.
One of the biggest surprises to me, and you mentioned it, working with a number of groups around staying alive and getting home safe and dry, is that I consider myself a strong swimmer, and lots of people do. So they say, well, I'm a strong swimmer. Well, being a strong swimmer, whether you're the best swimmer or the worst swimmer, cold water shock doesn't choose, because your body will take over when it reacts to that low temperature water. And we also don't realise, we think the water's going to be toasty, don't we, when it's 30 degrees? Well, it's not like the Med. It's flowing water. It's going to warm up very slowly. So that ability to be at a temperature where we don't react in a way that we can control then that tragedy can very quickly follow. And I know a lot of your Safer Neighbourhood teams, Jim, have been out there working around those hotspots. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, and I'm sure you, like everybody else, has noticed the change in the roads. So we went through a period of where traffic went down enormously, and here in West Mercia we saw the number of people killed and seriously injured dramatically reduced. Now, I, like you, will have noticed that in recent weeks traffic started to increase again. We're seeing more motorbikes at the weekends. We are seeing more traffic on the road full stop. We're going to go through a period of warmer weather again now, and just interested to hear from you around your and your team's work on how we're keeping safe on those roads. We talked a bit about safer homes, but also the biggest killer here in West Mercia is on our roads, and just interested in some of your team's work as we start to get back to our new normal of whatever that is, which will involve more cars on the road, what we're doing to ensure that more people are arriving alive. Yeah,
and I think we sometimes forget that members of the community are most likely to encounter a police officer when they're driving a car. You know, that for the vast majority of people, that's the highest likelihood that they're going to have an engagement with an officer. And you're absolutely right. We know about the things that lead to fatalities: drink driving, drug driving, speeding, no seatbelts. So very recently, the Chief Constable is the national lead for road policing. We had a highly successful campaign in recent weeks around speeding, which is part of the national campaign. Very pleased to say that contributions were made very strongly from across the board in terms of West Mercia. Strong representation within Shropshire and within Telford and Wrekin as well. In coming days and weeks, we have the national seatbelt campaign, and it's amazing that over 500 fatalities a year across the country are directly linked to people failing to wear their seatbelts. And I think many of us would think that seatbelt, that's a done deal, it's an automatic reaction, we all put our seatbelts on. But over 500 people a year are still dying because they're not putting the seatbelts on. And the other part of that evidence base is actually, even though it's quite it feels quite penal to have a fixed penalty notice, I think once you've had one, you won't forget again. And actually, enforcement saves lives. And so that's the message. We will be out there enforcing a seatbelt campaign. We will be enforcing speed because they kill. I've had a member of my family tragically die on a road collision. You can't begin to imagine how the people's wills dismantle because they've gone out for a drive, gone to work, and then they don't come home. And I think many of us have been touched by that. So we make no apologies. And I think we just need to make sure that we safer homes, safer people, safer roads.
Absolutely. I think the other thing for me was the speeds that were being recorded were things that I just hadn't seen really in my sort of 4 years around. Yes, people speed, and that, and I've seen that. But some of the levels of the speeds were, for our roads particularly in these rural areas, were incredible, really.
Yeah, it's not. I obviously drive to Telford every day. I use the roads, and I use the main 442. I use other side roads, and the standard of driving. It's a lack of patience of some people, isn't it? And you just wonder why you're in such a rush to get somewhere. And I know the other thing that the chief would say if he was online, it's been quite a lot of publicity about this extreme speeding, and he doesn't, that almost indicates that modest speeding is allowed, but actually the speed limit is the speed limit. And we all know that if you're doing, a significant amount above the speed limit of 30, the chances of killing that child that runs out in front of you is greatly increased. So the speed limits are there for a reason. We will police them proportionately, and it does save lives.
I absolutely love that you're channeling the Chief Constable tonight. His work's done if he's absolutely getting that message through and you're repeating it verbatim, because I've heard him say exactly that. This is ruining too many families, and to hear your personal story absolutely brings it to life. So there are more police officers out there. I have to get that pitch in. We're increasing in numbers. There are more traffic police officers, road police officers as well as local police officers in communities. But you guys can't be everywhere. And one of the things I'd say to the public is there are quite a few dash cams out there in the modern world. and often, and you alluded to it, you see behaviour on the way to work or indeed at different times, and sometimes you mutter, or indeed, I'm sure you don't, Jim, but mutter an expletive around somebody else's behaviour and we carry on with our journey. Well, academia shows that if we get an intervention to somebody whose behaviour of driving is poor at the right stage, we can divert the horrific incident down the line. Something called Operation Snap, which is on West Mercia Police's website, is an opportunity for people who have seen something and captured it on their dash cam when they're driving that they think is either dangerous or merits the attention of the police. Very simple, straightforward process to upload it, fill in a very simple form, and it's reviewed by a police officer, and either action can be taken, or indeed education can be offered, or indeed no action can be taken. But it's an opportunity for the police to review and intervene as to whether or not somebody's behaviour warrants that. And I've visited your colleagues who run it, and indeed some people have caught some really horrible driving, and the ability then to intervene and educate is really important, because I agree with the enforcement line, absolutely. But that opportunity to educate, to get people to change their behaviour, is also a great one. And if we can turn just a portion of the 1.2 million citizens of West Mercia into the eyes and the ears of the police when it comes to driver behaviour, absolutely we can make a difference.
And of course, there's nothing to guarantee that you will be the person who's taking the video, is there? You may be the person who's being videoed, so watch out.
Yeah, I think the thing for me about, I think Snap's fantastic, and the other thing I think it does is gives this sense of ownership. You know, if it's our children using that road to get to school, if it's our wife or husband or partner going to work, that sense of the community owning the safety of that piece of road, a bit like the community speed watch schemes as well. That sense of community, you know, the public are the police are the public. I think, and you don't know who's behind you. Have they got a camera, and will it be submitted, and will action be taken? So I think some fantastic benefits to Snap.
And for me, I think this is one of the areas where we can make a difference, because road safety has benefited hugely from all the safety benefits, seatbelts, airbags, crash protection. We are the last bit, aren't we? The soft bit behind the steering wheel is the last bit that's got to carry on reforming to ensure that we can get that number down. So if we can do it in lockdown, we can do it all year round. So I'm very supportive. I'm going to draw the session to an end in a moment. Jim, I don't know whether there was any messages you wanted to leave out there for the communities of Telford and Wrekin on, first of all, your expectation of how they can report crime, or indeed what they should do when they don't like things that are happening in their community, and any things that you want to leave with them.
Yeah, I suppose on the first point then, if we don't know about the issue, I mean, harm's such a broad spectrum, and you know, my history is around local policing, and for me, one of the whole purposes of local policing was to be able to understand harm in the community that perhaps the police don't know about. So if it lets people tell us about that harm, we don't know about it. And the other type of harm that we need help with is the harm that we don't realise quite how harmful it is. So we need the community to tell us about things that we don't know about, and also to quantify quite just how harmful those issues are in their community. When I started in Telford back in January, I said at the outset that the priority if I was to put a list of a hierarchy of harm, who is at the top of my personal hierarchy? It is children and young people at the risk of exploitation. And that exploitation could be criminal, and it could be sexual. And we all know the history of Telford, and we know about the independent inquiry into child sexual exploitation. So I'd also use this opportunity just to make that plea for anybody that knows of any exploitation or suspects exploitation to come forward, either to ourselves or to the inquiry, so that evidence can be taken and we can make that difference. Some very complex issues that we have to deal with, and so I'll just leave with that thought.
That for me is a really important one. So as a governance, I obviously hold the force to account for their performance, but also part of my role is the confidence of the public in the police that they will take action. And I, in my role, read a lot of survivors' accounts, and obviously hear stories around how somebody has been exploited, often over a long period of time in quite horrific circumstances. And there's always a common feature, that there are times in that person's experience of being exploited of where somebody could have intervened, somebody could have either noticed the signs or indeed have been a little more probing around the behaviour that they were seeing. And one of the very much lasting impacts on me is we have to challenge ourselves around the behaviour we see, because sometimes we can see behaviour that we think is offending, whereas actually we need to see past that and see absolutely the individuals and often the children that are underneath these particular instances. So really important message: step forward, you will be heard, you will believe. And there are lots of ways.
Sorry, John, I was just finishing off on that, just to say, I think that's a message out there to the entire community as well, isn't it? Because things that happen, particularly within the home, it is so unlikely that a police officer will come across that, you know, just by accident. But you live next door, you hear it, you see them. And, you know, sometimes that takes 5, isn't it? Just take 5 minutes and think about what you've seen, and is it appropriate? And if not, then let somebody know. Nobody's ever going to tell you not to phone that through.
And there are lots of ways to do that in terms of West Mercia Police's own website. There are online reporting tools. There is access to who your local policing teams are if you just want to chat around some of your concerns. There's the non-emergency 101 number. There is the 999 number for emergencies, but there are also some of the more confidential routes in terms of Crime Stoppers, but also through some of the victim services that are out there, all listed on my website, who can support you. And that doesn't have to be around a criminal police route. Our offer to you as a survivor and a victim is to support you, and the offer of the police is to help you on the criminal justice side, if that is what you want and support as a victim. Jim, I want to thank you and Tracey for joining us today. You're groundbreaking today, Jim. We've not done one of these before, so you get an extra brownie point for quoting the Chief Constable a couple of times. We'll feed that back to Hindlip. I, on behalf of the community, do want to say a big thank you to you and your teams for what you do to keep our community safe. Policing through COVID, I think, shows the very best of what policing is. You and your colleagues worried about your own health, your family's health, all the things that we're all worried about as a community, and yet you're still out there keeping us safe and ensuring those that are vulnerable, that need to be protected, are protected. And I am incredibly proud to be Commissioner because of the hard work that does on the ground, and that's done by you and your colleagues. That doesn't mean to say I don't hold you to account, because of course that's the way it's going to be, but I'm also very grateful for that effort and very proud to be Commissioner because of that hard work. Thank you as well, Tracey, for joining this evening. We're going to have to buy you something to hold your phone in, though, because unless there's been an earthquake in your part of North Worcestershire, but a useful contribution. And my reminder is to anybody that's watched that wants to submit a question, we're in Shrewsbury tomorrow, and in North and South Worcestershire next week, and Herefordshire. And if you do have a question either for myself or for the Superintendent, then don't be afraid to either comment underneath this article or to email us directly. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll bring the broadcast to a close.